The evening the divorce papers appeared, nothing felt dramatic at first. The house was quiet, like any other weekday. The dishes were drying on the rack. The television was on low volume. She was folding laundry on the couch, thinking about what to cook the next day. He walked in later than usual. That had become normal over the past year. Longer hours, more meetings, more business trips. He no longer explained much, and she had stopped asking too many questions because every question seemed to irritate him. He did not kiss her hello. He did not sit down. He simply placed a thin brown envelope on the coffee table between them. At first, she thought it was another work document. He often brought files home. She even reached for it casually, expecting spreadsheets or contracts. But when she saw her full name printed in bold letters across the top, her hands froze. "What is this?" she asked softly. He did not look angry. He did not look sad either. He looked calm, too calm. "It's better this way," he said. Her heart started beating faster, but her mind still refused to understand. "Better what way?" "We're not working anymore," he replied. "We've grown apart. I think it's time to move on." The words felt rehearsed, like something he had practiced in front of a mirror. She stared at the papers again. Divorce petition. Her throat felt dry. "Since when?" she whispered. He shrugged slightly. "For a while. I just didn't know how to say it." That hurt more than shouting would have. There had been no huge fights. No broken plates. No screaming. Yes, things had been distant. Yes, he had changed. But she thought it was stress from work. She thought it was just a phase couples go through. She had stood beside him when his company was still small, when his salary was average, when he doubted himself. She had worked extra hours at her own job to help with rent during the early years. And now, he stood there like he was talking about canceling a subscription. "Is there someone else?" she asked quietly. He hesitated for half a second. That half second felt louder than a confession. "That's not the point," he answered. She felt something break inside her chest. The silence between them grew heavy. He began explaining practical things. The apartment, the car, the joint bank account. He spoke like he was presenting a business plan. Calm, clear, emotionless. She could barely hear him. Her ears were ringing. All she could think about was how, just last month, they had attended a company dinner together. He had introduced her proudly to his colleagues. He had placed his hand on her back, like everything was fine. Had it all been fake? He slid a pen across the table. "I'm not asking you to sign tonight," he said. "Just read it. My lawyer made it simple. It's fair." Fair. The word felt strange. She nodded slowly, not because she agreed, but because she did not trust her voice. That night, he slept in the guest room. She stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed once around midnight. A message from her father. "Hope you had a good day. Call me tomorrow." She almost replied, but she didn't want to worry him. Her father had always been quiet but attentive. He lived alone in a small house across town. He dressed simply. He drove an old sedan that had been paid off years ago. He never spoke much about money or business. In her eyes, he was just a retired man who enjoyed reading newspapers and watering his small garden. She had never known him to interfere in her marriage. He respected boundaries. When she married, he had simply said, "Choose someone who chooses you every day." At the time, she believed she had. The next morning, she went to work like nothing had happened. She smiled at coworkers. She answered emails. She sat in meetings and took notes. Inside, she felt like she was underwater. By afternoon, she finally opened the envelope again during her lunch break. The document was clean and clear. According to it, he would keep most of his company shares since they were pre-growth assets. The apartment would be sold. The savings would be divided. But most investments were listed under accounts she had never seen before. Her hands started shaking. When had he opened separate accounts? Why didn't she know about these investments? They had always talked about building a future together. At least, she thought they had. That evening, she called her father. He answered on the second ring. "You sound tired," he said gently. She tried to stay strong, but her voice cracked. He wanted a divorce. There was a long pause on the other end. Not shock, not anger, just silence. Did he explain why? Her father asked calmly. He says we grew apart. Another pause. Are you okay? He asked. That question broke her. She began crying quietly, trying not to make noise in case her husband heard from the other room. Her father did not interrupt. He let her cry. When she finally stopped, he spoke slowly. Come over tomorrow evening, he said. We'll talk. The next day felt longer than the last. At home, her husband acted polite but distant. He avoided eye contact. He stepped outside frequently to take calls. When she entered a room, he sometimes lowered his voice. Something inside her started to feel uneasy, not just heartbroken, unsettled. The following evening, she drove to her father's house. It looked the same as always. Small, neat, ordinary. He opened the door before she even knocked, as if he had been waiting behind it. He made tea. He placed her favorite biscuits on a plate. They sat at the small wooden dining table she had grown up around. She explained everything. The envelope, the accounts, the sudden coldness. Her father listened carefully, his face serious but controlled. Did you know about these separate investments? He asked. She shook her head. Did he ask you to sign quickly? He said I can take my time, she replied, but it feels rushed. Her father leaned back slightly in his chair. Do not sign anything yet, he said firmly. She looked at him, surprised by the strength in his voice. Why? He paused, choosing his words. Sometimes when people make sudden decisions, it's not sudden at all. It's planned. The sentence made her stomach tighten. Are you saying he planned this? Her father did not answer directly. Just give me a little time, he said quietly. Trust me. She had always trusted him, but she didn't understand what he could possibly do. He was retired. He had no connection to her husband's fast-moving corporate world. Still, something in his eyes looked different that night. Not worried, focused. When she left, he walked in her car like he always did. Whatever happens, he said softly, you will not be left with nothing. She assumed he meant emotional support. She did not know he meant much more. Back at the apartment, her husband was on his laptop, typing intensely. Did you think about it? He asked without looking up. I need more time, she answered. He sighed, clearly annoyed. There's nothing complicated about it, he said. It's straightforward. Straightforward for him. Maybe. She went to bed feeling small, confused, and strangely suspicious. For the first time in years, she looked at him not as her partner, but as someone she might not truly know. And miles away in his quiet house, her father sat alone at his desk. He was not reading the newspaper. He was not watering plants. He was making a phone call. His tone was calm, professional, and nothing like the gentle voice he used with his daughter. It's time, he said into the phone. Begin the review. Outside, the night was still. Inside, two different homes. Two very different plans were already in motion, and she had no idea that the story of her marriage was only the beginning of something much bigger. The next day, she couldn't stop thinking about her father's words. His calmness, the way he had looked at her with quiet certainty, kept replaying in her mind. She wondered how someone could be so composed while she felt like her world had collapsed. She tried to return to normal life, but every little detail reminded her that things were different now. She went to the kitchen to make coffee, but she barely touched it. Her eyes kept wandering around the room, imagining the divorce papers sitting in the envelope, waiting for her signature. She thought about all the small things she and her husband had shared. Every breakfast, every movie night, every simple conversation. It all now seemed fragile, like it could break apart at any moment. At work, she forced herself to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting. She remembered how he had looked the night he handed her the papers. So calm, so certain. It was unsettling. She had never seen him like that. It made her question everything about their life together. Was their marriage ever really strong? Or had she just been too blind to notice the cracks? Her phone buzzed with a message from her father again. Come over tonight. We need to talk more. She felt a small relief, knowing she wasn't entirely alone in facing this. There was someone who understood, someone who would guide her. But she also felt a strange curiosity. Why was he so confident that everything would be okay? She had always thought of her father as a simple, quiet man. He had never been involved in her work life or her finances. He had never tried to influence her decisions. And yet, now he seemed to have a plan she couldn't even imagine. The drive to his house was quiet. The streets were empty, the air cool, and the world felt slower somehow. When she arrived, he was waiting at the door, exactly as he had been the previous evening. He greeted her with a soft smile and led her inside. The familiar smell of tea and old books filled the room. It felt comforting, like stepping back into childhood. They sat at the small table again. She poured herself a cup of tea, trying to steady her hands. Her father watched her carefully, but didn't speak immediately. He seemed to be thinking, weighing his words before he said anything. "I want you to understand something," he began gently. "Life sometimes gives us shocks that we are not ready for. But not all shocks are random. Some are carefully planned, even if we don't realize it. People make decisions behind our backs, sometimes for their benefit, sometimes to hide the truth. You need to be cautious." She listened, her heart racing. "Do you think he planned this?" she asked quietly. Her father nodded slowly. "I can't say for sure, but there are signs. The way he handled the papers, the calmness, the separation of accounts you never knew about. Things don't happen by accident when people are thinking ahead." Her mind spun. Could it really be true? Could someone she loved so deeply be capable of such careful, quiet planning? And if so, what had he planned exactly? "I feel lost," she admitted. "I don't even know where to start. Everything we built together feels like it was an illusion." Her father reached across the table and placed a hand over hers. "It's not an illusion. It's real. Your life is real. But you need to see clearly who is protecting you and who is not. Right now, you are vulnerable, and that's why you need guidance. Not to control you, but to protect you." She took a deep breath, feeling a strange mixture of fear and hope. Her father had always been a stabilizing force in her life, even in small ways. She remembered how he had taught her to read financial statements when she was young, just as a skill to be independent. She remembered how he had helped her understand numbers, investments, and responsibility without ever pushing his own agenda. Now, those lessons seemed more important than ever. He leaned back slightly and looked at her with serious eyes. "I need you to trust me. For now, do not sign anything. Let's watch and understand the situation fully before making any decisions. The man you thought you knew, he might not be who he appears to be." She swallowed hard. She wanted to protest, to say she knew him, to say she understood him better than anyone. But deep down, she realized she didn't. There had always been a side of him she hadn't seen. And now, that side was influencing the most important decision of her life. The evening passed slowly. They didn't talk about her husband much, but her father explained how people sometimes manipulate situations to their benefit. He talked about how appearances can be deceiving, how calmness can hide intent, and how planning can make the ordinary seem ordinary while hiding extraordinary actions. She listened intently, realizing how naive she had been. She thought she understood people, but now she could see how easily life could surprise her. She thought about her husband at home, typing on his laptop, planning, unaware that she was being guided, protected, and watched by someone who understood more than she had ever imagined. Her father didn't reveal everything that night. He didn't need to. She trusted him, and that trust was enough to feel slightly empowered amidst the chaos. He reminded her that life was not only about surviving shocks, but about understanding them, and using that understanding to protect oneself. When she left, the night air felt different, less heavy. She felt like she had taken the first step in regaining control of her life, even though she didn't fully understand how. She knew her father had a plan, and for the first time since receiving the divorce papers, she felt like she wasn't completely alone. Back at the apartment, her husband was still on his laptop. He glanced up as she entered. "Have you thought about it?" he asked. She shook her head. "I need more time," she replied. Her voice was steadier than it had been the night. He handed her the papers. He frowned, clearly frustrated, but she no longer felt the same fear. There was a protective force now that she couldn't see, but she trusted it. That night, she went to bed feeling cautious, but awake. She thought about her father's words and how he had always prepared her to face challenges with patience and clarity. She realized that this challenge was bigger than anything she had faced before, But she also understood that she had resources she had never recognized. In his quiet home, her father stayed up late. He did not watch television or read. He reviewed documents, made phone calls, and spoke with advisors in hushed tones. He was not a man of flash, but he was a man of action. The calm, ordinary appearance he maintained in his daily life had a mind that worked with precision and foresight. His plan was not only about protecting his daughter, but about understanding the man who had entered her life. He had watched quietly, noticing patterns, uncovering inconsistencies, and preparing for the moment when intervention would be necessary. This was not about control, but about timing and preparation. Meanwhile, she remained unaware of the depth of his actions. She only knew that her father's presence brought her comfort and guidance. She trusted him implicitly, even if she didn't understand the full picture. The world around her felt unstable, but within the small, quiet force of her father's care, she felt a flicker of hope. Days passed slowly. She navigated conversations with coworkers and friends, keeping her personal turmoil mostly hidden. Each interaction reminded her of how much had changed in her life. She realized she needed to be careful, to observe, and to wait before making any major decisions. The calmness her father had displayed was becoming a model for how she wanted to approach the coming days. She also began to notice small things about her husband that she had ignored before. The way he avoided certain topics, the subtle tension in his expressions, and the careful choice of words. She realized that her father's warnings about appearances being deceptive were not just abstract advice. They were becoming reality before her eyes. By the end of the week, she felt a mixture of anxiety and readiness. She was anxious because the uncertainty of her marriage weighed heavily, but she was ready because she had guidance and perspective she hadn't had before. She realized that even in the darkest moments, support and wisdom could change how a person navigates life. Her father called her one evening and said simply, "You're doing well. Keep watching. Keep learning. The truth will reveal itself, and when it does, you will be ready." She hung up, feeling the weight of those words. They were not comforting in a traditional sense, but they gave her clarity. She knew now that patience, observation, and trust in her father's guidance were crucial. As she lay in bed that night, she reflected on the events of the past week. The divorce papers, her husband's sudden coldness, and her father's quiet intervention were all pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. The world seemed unpredictable and sometimes unfair, but she felt that with careful attention and the right guidance, she could navigate it. She didn't know what the next week would bring. She didn't know how far her father's influence reached or how much he already knew about her husband. All she knew was that for the first time since the divorce papers arrived, she felt a measure of control in a situation that had once seemed hopeless. And that, she realized, was the beginning of reclaiming her life. The following week brought a strange mix of fear and curiosity. She went about her days quietly, but her mind was constantly replaying the moments of the previous week. Every interaction with her husband felt like walking on thin ice. She noticed how he moved around the apartment, how he answered calls, and the subtle shifts in his mood. There was an invisible tension that neither of them addressed, and it made every shared moment feel uncertain. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table, she realized how little she actually knew about him. They had shared years together, but some aspects of his life had always remained private, and now, those hidden parts were coming to light in the most painful way. She thought about the accounts she had never seen, the investments she had never been told about, and the sudden calmness he had displayed when handing her the divorce papers. It was unsettling, and it made her wonder if she had ever truly understood the man she married. Her father's advice echoed in her mind: watch, observe, and do not act hastily. She had no idea what he already knew or how much he had prepared for this moment, but she trusted him. She remembered his calmness, his quiet confidence, and the way he had always guided her without imposing his will. That guidance was more valuable than any sudden action or confrontation. At work, she tried to maintain her usual routine, but she found herself distracted. Every email, every meeting, every conversation felt layered with potential hidden motives. She noticed colleagues whispering, glances exchanged, and a subtle competitiveness she hadn't paid attention to before. Her father's words about appearances being deceptive seemed more real each day. People could smile, nod, and act as if everything were normal while hiding their own plans and intentions. One afternoon, her husband asked her to review a document related to his work. She could see the tension in his eyes, the careful way he phrased his questions. She followed her father's advice and observed quietly. Something felt off, a detail she couldn't immediately place. She nodded politely, asked clarifying questions, and tried to stay calm. She realized that even small interactions were revealing layers of character she hadn't noticed before. That evening, she drove to her father's house again. She needed to process what she had seen and discuss the subtle changes in her husband's behavior. The familiar comfort of her father's home greeted her. The smell of tea, the quiet rustle of papers, and the soft lighting created a sense of stability she desperately needed. They sat together at the table, and she recounted the day's observations. Her father listened intently, asking questions and helping her connect the dots. He helped her notice patterns, inconsistencies, and subtle signals she might have overlooked. He spoke about human nature, how people sometimes act in their own interest, and how careful observation could reveal truth without confrontation. "You're learning more than just facts about him," he said quietly. "You're learning about yourself too. How you react, what you notice, and how you protect what matters. That is more important than any single action you might take right now." She nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. She was learning to see clearly, but the clarity came with responsibility. She realized that every word, every gesture, and every decision mattered. She couldn't act impulsively, but she could observe and prepare. Back at the apartment, her husband seemed more cautious than usual. He noticed her attention to detail, the way she asked questions, and the subtle awareness in her tone. For the first time, she felt that the balance of understanding was shifting. She wasn't powerless anymore, even though she had no idea of the full extent of her father's influence. Just the awareness that someone she trusted was watching over her gave her confidence. The following days were filled with careful observation and reflection. She noticed the way her husband interacted with others, the way he managed his schedule, and the hidden patterns in his actions. Every small detail seemed to carry weight. She realized that the calm, ordinary life they had shared was layered with complexity she had never fully seen. And now, the lessons her father had subtly taught her for years were becoming invaluable. Her father continued to provide guidance without giving away the full picture. He reminded her to watch, listen, and think critically. He helped her process the emotions of betrayal, confusion, and hurt while also focusing on practical steps to protect herself. His calm presence became a shield, allowing her to navigate the uncertainty with more clarity. One evening, as she sat in her father's living room, he handed her a notebook. Inside were observations he had made over time about her husband's professional dealings and personal habits. She was stunned. She had never known her father to be so involved. Yet, the notebook was presented not as a tool for confrontation, but as a guide for understanding. Every entry was precise, factual, and carefully documented. She realized how much effort he had put into preparing her for moments like this. It wasn't about controlling her life. It was about equipping her with knowledge. The realization made her feel both grateful and slightly overwhelmed. Her father had quietly built a safety net she hadn't known existed, and now she understood that his calm demeanor was rooted in deep preparation. That night, she returned to the apartment with a renewed sense of purpose. She began to approach interactions with her husband differently. She asked questions, noted inconsistencies, and maintained a calm exterior. She could see the subtle tension in his responses, the small signs of unease. It was empowering to observe without revealing her full awareness. She felt more in control, even though the full story was still beyond her reach. Her father's influence was evident not only in her actions, but in her mindset. She began to notice the difference between reacting impulsively and responding thoughtfully. She understood that patience and observation were forms of power. Each day, she learned more about the hidden dynamics around her, and each day, she felt more prepared to face the challenges ahead. One afternoon, she received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was professional, careful, and direct. It was a representative from her husband's company, asking questions about her knowledge of certain accounts and investments. She remained calm, answered briefly, and promised to provide any necessary information through official channels. She realized that her father had prepared her for this exact moment. She had learned to navigate these interactions with composure and intelligence. That evening, she discussed the call with her father. He nodded, acknowledging her calm handling of the situation. "You're learning fast," he said. "Observe, think, and act when necessary. That is how you protect yourself and your future." The days that followed were a mix of routine life and careful observation. She continued her work, managed her household, and maintained social interactions, all while quietly analyzing the hidden layers of her life. Each interaction, each detail, and each observation added to her understanding. She realized that life was rarely simple, and that the appearance of calm could hide complex intentions. Through it all, she remained grateful for her father's guidance. His quiet wisdom, careful preparation, and unwavering support provided a foundation she had never known she needed. She understood that the true measure of strength was not in confrontation or aggression, but in knowledge, patience, and strategic observation. By the end of the week, she felt a sense of clarity. She didn't yet know the full extent of her father's actions or the depth of her husband's planning, but she felt prepared to face whatever came next. She had learned to observe, to think critically, and to trust in the quiet guidance of someone who cared deeply for her well-being. As she lay in bed that night, she reflected on the lessons of the past days. The divorce papers, her husband's behavior, and her father's subtle interventions had all combined to teach her a profound lesson. True strength comes from awareness, preparation, and the ability to act wisely when the time is right. She felt a growing sense of empowerment, knowing that she was no longer simply a bystander in her own life. She was becoming an active participant, guided by wisdom, observation, and quiet strength. One morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, she noticed her husband was unusually quiet. He walked around the apartment, checking his phone repeatedly, his expressions tense and distracted. There was a subtle shift in the air, a feeling that something had changed, even though nothing had been openly said. She observed him carefully, remembering her father's advice about watching and understanding people without jumping to conclusions. She realized how small details could reveal a lot. The way he held his phone, the way he avoided eye contact, the sudden hesitance in his tone when speaking to her. Each subtle sign painted a picture she had never fully considered. For the first time, she felt that she was noticing things that others might have missed. The guidance from her father had sharpened her awareness, and it was becoming clear that observation alone could be powerful. That afternoon, she received an unexpected call from someone at her husband's office. They asked about certain financial arrangements and ownership details. She answered calmly, keeping her tone measured and neutral. As she spoke, she realized that her father had prepared her for this exact moment. She had learned how to respond without revealing too much, while also gathering important information. The sense of control she felt was new and empowering. When she returned home, she noticed her husband pacing in the living room. His movements were sharper, less relaxed, and there was an undercurrent of tension in his voice. She stayed calm, carefully choosing her words and observing his reactions. Each response he gave, each hesitation he made, seemed to confirm that he had not anticipated her level of awareness. She felt a subtle satisfaction in knowing that she was no longer completely vulnerable. That evening, she decided to visit her father. She needed advice on how to handle the growing tension and the questions that were being directed at her. When she arrived, the house was quiet, filled with a familiar scent of tea and old books. He greeted her with a nod, understanding her need for guidance without asking unnecessary questions. They sat at the table together, and she recounted the day's events, the call from the office, and her observations of her husband's behavior. Her father listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes and asking clarifying questions. He helped her connect the dots, pointing out patterns she might have missed, subtle inconsistencies, and ways to remain cautious without seeming suspicious. "You're noticing things that many people would overlook," he said softly. "That awareness is your advantage. You can see intentions that are hidden, and you can protect yourself without confrontation." She nodded, absorbing every word. The sense of clarity she felt was growing stronger. Her father's quiet strength and preparation were becoming a source of empowerment, allowing her to navigate the uncertainty with confidence. She realized that she had been living in a world of appearances, and now she was beginning to understand the layers beneath those appearances. The following days were filled with careful observation and analysis. She paid attention to how her husband interacted with colleagues, how he responded to emails, and the subtle signals in his behavior. Each detail added to her understanding, and each observation reinforced the importance of patience and strategic thinking. She began to notice that even small gestures, like a glance or a tone of voice, could reveal hidden intentions. Her father continued to provide guidance without revealing everything he knew. He helped her process her emotions, the sense of betrayal, and the growing realization that her husband might not be the man she thought he was. He encouraged her to remain calm, think critically, and act only when necessary. His approach was not about controlling her life, but equipping her with the tools to navigate it wisely. One evening, as they sat together, her father handed her a folder containing documents he had compiled over time. These included observations about her husband's professional dealings, personal habits, and patterns that he had noticed. She was stunned by the depth of preparation. The folder was not presented as a weapon, but as a guide, a way to understand the situation fully before taking any action. She realized how much her father had anticipated. His quiet vigilance had been preparing her for this moment, even before she was fully aware of the challenges ahead. The realization made her feel both grateful and overwhelmed. She understood that his calm demeanor was not just personality, but a reflection of careful planning and foresight. Back at the apartment, she began to interact with her husband differently. She asked questions with precision, observed responses carefully, and maintained a calm, composed exterior. She noticed the subtle signs of unease in his expressions and the careful way he chose his words. The balance of awareness was shifting, and she felt a growing sense of empowerment. She was no longer a passive participant in her life. She was actively observing, learning, and preparing. The tension in the apartment grew. He seemed to sense that she was no longer unaware, that she was watching and understanding more than before. Her calmness contrasted with his growing anxiety, creating an unspoken power dynamic. She realized that knowledge, observation, and patience were becoming her tools for protection and clarity. One evening, she received another call from the office, asking for clarification on certain accounts and transactions. She handled it with the same composed approach, noting every detail and observing the reactions of the caller. She realized that each interaction was an opportunity to gather information, to understand intentions, and to prepare for any possible outcome. Her father's guidance had transformed her approach, allowing her to navigate complex situations with confidence and composure. When she visited her father later that night, she discussed the call and her observations. He nodded, acknowledging her careful handling and strategic thinking. "You are learning to protect yourself without confrontation," he said. "That is strength. That is power." The days continued in this pattern, a mix of normal routines and careful observation. She managed her work, household, and social interactions while quietly analyzing the hidden dynamics of her life. Each interaction, each observation, added to her understanding. She realized that life was rarely simple and that appearances could be deceiving. She began to see the subtle forces at play, and she felt increasingly capable of navigating them. Through it all, she remained grateful for her father's guidance. His quiet wisdom, careful preparation, and unwavering support provided a foundation she had never known she needed. She understood that true strength was not in confrontation or aggression, but in knowledge, patience, and strategic observation. By the end of the week, she felt a growing sense of clarity. She didn't yet know the full extent of her father's actions or the depth of her husband's planning, but she felt prepared to face whatever came next. She had learned to observe, think critically, and trust in the quiet guidance of someone who cared deeply for her well-being. As she lay in bed that night, she reflected on the lessons of the past week. The divorce papers, her husband's behavior, and her father's subtle interventions had all combined to teach her a profound lesson. True strength comes from awareness, preparation, and the ability to act wisely when the time is right. She felt a growing sense of empowerment, knowing that she was no longer simply a bystander in her own life. She was becoming an active participant, guided by wisdom, observation, and quiet strength. Her father's actions, though hidden and subtle, were shaping her ability to navigate the challenges ahead. He had created a network of preparation, understanding, and insight that allowed her to face the uncertainty with confidence. She realized that the calm, ordinary life they had shared had layers she had never understood, and now she was beginning to see them clearly. The week ended with a sense of cautious optimism. She continued to live her life, maintain routines, and observe carefully. She was learning to balance emotion with analysis, intuition with observation, and patience with action. Each day brought new insights, and each insight strengthened her resolve. She knew that the full story had not yet unfolded, but she felt ready to face whatever came next with clarity, courage, and the quiet strength her father had instilled in her. The day finally came when the truth started to unfold in ways she had never imagined. She woke up early, feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The divorce papers still sat on the kitchen table, untouched, but there was a different energy in the apartment. Her husband was moving around more carefully, checking his phone constantly, his expressions tense and distracted. She remained calm, observing silently, remembering her father's guidance. Patience, awareness, and measured action. Her phone buzzed with a message from her father. "Meet me at the office. It's time you see the bigger picture." Her heart raced. She had no idea what he meant, but she trusted him. She got ready, taking a deep breath, and drove to the location he had sent. When she arrived, her father was already there, waiting with his usual calm demeanor. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he led her into a private room, a place that felt unusually serious and important. There were documents neatly arranged on the table, and her father motioned for her to sit. "You need to understand everything now," he said quietly. "Not just what happened with your husband, but the context, the scale, and why things unfolded the way they did." She listened intently as he began explaining. He revealed details she had never known about hidden accounts, undisclosed investments, and the quiet ways he had built his wealth over the years. He wasn't just a retired accountant living simply. He had quietly owned companies, shares, and assets that span across industries and countries. It was a life of strategy and foresight she had never imagined. Her mind spun with revelations. She remembered all the subtle ways he had always supported her without showing his true capacity. The old car, the modest home, the quiet demeanor, they were all part of a life she had only partially understood. And now, she realized, her father had been in a position to intervene in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. He then explained his involvement with her husband's company. He had purchased a controlling stake months before the divorce papers were signed. He had been quietly monitoring the situation, gathering evidence of hidden accounts and intentions, and preparing a plan to protect her future. It wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about ensuring she wasn't left vulnerable to someone who had made calculated decisions behind her back. She felt a mixture of shock, relief, and awe. Her father had quietly orchestrated a safeguard without ever making her feel dependent or controlled. The realization that she had been under protection of someone so capable filled her with a strange sense of security. The anxiety and fear that had weighed on her were still present, but now there was clarity. Her father handed her more documents, including the evidence of her husband's planning and the legal measures he had put in place to prevent her from being left without support. She read through them carefully, feeling the full weight of the situation. Her husband's calmness, the careful separation of accounts, the sudden push for divorce. It all made sense now. He had been making calculated moves, thinking he could act without consequences. But her father had anticipated it all. Later that day, her father arranged a meeting at the company. She entered the boardroom, unsure of what to expect. To her surprise, her husband was already there, looking more anxious than she had ever seen him. And at the head of the table, seated confidently, was her father. The calm, modest man she had known all her life was now a position of clear authority. Introductions were brief. Her father addressed the matters of ownership, hidden accounts, and corporate oversight with professional clarity that left no room for argument. Her husband realized, with growing panic, that the quiet, ordinary man he had underestimated controlled the very structures he had assumed he could manipulate. Every plan he had made was now subject to scrutiny, and every hidden account was being reviewed. The meeting concluded with clear terms. Her husband's efforts to take advantage of the situation were neutralized. The divorce was finalized with fairness, ensuring she received what she deserved. She had no desire for revenge, only clarity, fairness, and protection. Her father's quiet intervention had ensured that she was no longer at the mercy of someone who had underestimated her and the strength surrounding her. After the meeting, she and her father walked out together. She felt a sense of closure, not just about the divorce, but about understanding the true depth of her father's wisdom and foresight. She realized that his calmness and simplicity were deliberate, a shield he had built over years of careful planning. He had prepared for moments like this, not to control her life, but to protect it. In the weeks that followed, she began to rebuild her life. She started her own consulting business, quietly funded by her father's support. She found empowerment and independence and clarity in understanding the forces at play around her. She maintained professionalism and composure in every interaction, observing patterns and making informed decisions. The lessons her father had imparted, patience, observation, critical thinking, and strategic action, became guiding principles. Her father returned to his quiet home, back to his modest routines. Yet she knew the impact of his actions would shape her life forever. He had acted without fanfare, with discretion and intelligence, ensuring her safety and empowerment. She often reflected on the experience, realizing that true strength wasn't loud or visible. It was in preparation, understanding, and the ability to act wisely when the moment demanded. Months later, as she walked through her new office, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The divorce, the revelations, the careful guidance from her father. It had been a time of upheaval, learning, and growth. She had emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of the hidden dynamics in life. She understood that appearances could be deceiving, and that knowledge, patience, and observation were forms of power. She often called her father to discuss decisions and strategies, not because she needed him to control her life, but because his insight had become invaluable. He listened, advised, and guided, always respecting her autonomy while providing clarity. She realized that the quiet support and foresight of one person could change the trajectory of a life, ensuring protection, fairness, and empowerment. Looking back, she knew that the experience had transformed her. She had learned to navigate complex situations with awareness, patience, and strategic thinking. She had learned the value of observing, understanding, and acting with intention. And most importantly, she had learned that strength often comes from quiet wisdom, careful preparation, and the support of someone who truly cares. Her life continued, enriched by the lessons and protections she had received. She approached challenges with calmness, awareness, and confidence, knowing that she was capable of facing uncertainty and navigating complexities. She had become an active participant in her own life, guided by wisdom, observation, and quiet strength. And while the past could not be changed, she had gained something far more valuable: understanding, empowerment, and the certainty that she would never again face the world unprepared. The experience had taught her that true protection does not announce itself, that real strength is quiet, and that the most profound guidance often comes from those who act behind the scenes, unseen but ever present, shaping outcomes with care and intelligence. Her father remained a constant presence, quietly supporting her decisions, ready to guide when needed but never imposing. She felt grateful, grounded, and aware, realizing that the lessons she had learned would serve her for a lifetime. Life would continue with its unpredictability, but she was ready. The journey had ended with clarity, fairness, and empowerment, and she stepped forward into her future with confidence, knowing she was prepared for whatever came next.